Okay, so let's go ahead and jump right in. So as I mentioned a moment ago, we're going to be covering PCI compliance for today. And we're going to be thinking through all of the ways in which you can improve your PCI compliance posture. We'll touch on a little bit of other types of compliance that can be addressed through Sumo Logic. And we're really going to go more methodically through all 12 requirements and give you a sense as well through the process of how you can utilize dashboards, alerts, queries to really improve upon your flow, accelerate that audit process. And let's just jump through a couple slides and then we'll get live in the platform. So with that, we have a lot of conversations with our customers around what their various goals are around PCI compliance. Obviously, there becomes a really big focal point, for example, on really navigating through how you utilize financial data internally, having better understanding of how Sumo actually will accept in all of the data that you need in order to actually get off and running quickly. Or in the case of using, for example, processing rules, you might want to hash or mask certain types of data that are coming into the system before you actually even start showing that data to your own internal employees as they navigate through. So, just taking a little bit of a step back, a lot of the challenges that we typically would see for our customer base would be, lack of cloud support for existing tools. So you may have a current approach that simply just does not scale to handle your various cloud workloads. These slow cycles to PCI readiness that lead to kind of time-consuming product deployment and tuning of your PCI related activity. And then just overall complexity, right? There are these very complex solutions on the market that, certainly if you power through them and drive towards resolution, you'll actually be able to achieve that PCI, those PCI compliance requirements that may be required by your auditing team or by your own internal requirements. But in the process, there's a very steep learning curve to get there. Not all the teammates necessarily are fully grasping how to actually achieve that. And then fourthly, expensive, right? So Sumo very much operates with a flexible licensing model based on a combination of our credit system as well as tiering, which is these three core types of data tiers that allow you to really mix and match according to what kinds of data you're bringing into the system. Versus a lot of other times you're going to see really expensive solutions with fixed licensing that may not actually align particularly well with your particular business. So yeah, we'll kind of jump into what does that solution look like, and we're going to be looking at it all throughout today, but just at the highest possible level. Sumo itself is very much a cloud native data monitoring tool designed for analysis and retention of your data, and it really enables that kind of cost effective but also very fast PCI readiness for cloud as well as on-prem environments. We don't want to scare you off with the cloud native phrase. If you are more on-prem heavy, we really do have the ability to cover both use cases, but have very much the advantage of being able to spool up quickly and react to your needs, because of the fact that Sumo itself is very much built on AWS as a platform. We kind of touched on some of these aspects, but some of the key advantages that you'll see with Sumo again, are going to be that cloud native scalability. So the fact that it's a SaaS solution, no hardware requirements, you can get up and running with a hosted collector and have Sumo do the heavy lifting for you, which makes it highly scalable, highly elastic. It really eliminates the need to manage any equipment in the process. You're really going to get that rapid compliance readiness that you'll see in more concrete terms in a moment here. So PCI 3.2.1 compliant as a platform itself as well. So kind of looking at whether or not Sumo itself, it for sure is PCI compliant. So that's something that you can, should help to kind of allay any concerns there. Ease of use and flexibility. It's really meant to easily tailor the platform to your needs. So you can really customize, set up dashboards according to how you really need to tune it according to what types of data you'll be bringing to the system. Again, once we dive into the platform in a moment, you really see that customizability of the queries that underpin each of these dashboards can be customized according to what you're actually looking to achieve with your data sources. And then finally, cost effective, right? We touched on that kind of affordable tiered licensing structure that's very flexible according to how you actually utilize the credits to align better with your needs. So yeah, I mean, looking at the core 12 requirements, as I mentioned, we're gonna go through all 12 today. So probably if you're on the call and you're excited enough about PCI compliance, you probably are familiar with all 12, and we're gonna cover all 12 in the scope of today. Just to quickly, touch on a few for sure. Some of the core pieces here you're going to see are install and maintaining firewall configuration is a dedicated dashboard that we have built within the platform that I'll be able to show you. I really think requirement 4 ends up being the crux and the core of a lot of this. Is all about encryption and transmission of cardholder data, and then also getting more granular. Protecting all your systems against malware or anti-malware software specifically, developing, maintaining secure systems, making sure you're tracking to your policy requirements within those. And the list goes on. I mean, I'd say another one that's really critical for sure would be requirement 10, which we'll touch on, is track and monitor all access to network resources and cardholder data. So with that, you can see some really quick stats here. Sumo itself is, we have over 2,000 customers, 30 million plus searches are performed daily, 100 petabytes of data analyzed daily. So you can see quite a bit of data is funneling through our platform on a day-to-day basis, and very much, should be proof positive for you that we'll be able to kind of handle whatever workloads you are interested in actually sending to it. So with that, I'm going to actually just dig into the platform itself. So let me switch over to Sumo. Actually, give me one moment and give me 1 second. I'll just re-log back in. Okay, so we are live in the platform. Let me reshare screen. So just as a quick kind of lay of the land, so Sumo as a platform is really hinged around these kind of core pieces of log searches, metrics, traces, live tails. As it relates to both logs and metrics, as well as traces to an extent, we will you really can perform queries. You can generate and save down alerts from those queries, and then you can create dashboards. In this case, we're looking at just a simple example of a PCI related dashboard. But first, let me actually give you a quick tour of the platform as well. So from here, we can generate new log searches, metric searches, new dashboards. Explore gets into more of our Kubernetes offering, and Livetail as well, just as one example where you can actually look at live data and then almost operate like you would in terminal and have the ability to navigate through a lot of different types of data and be able to save that down to other tools for analysis as well. Just to give a quick look at compliance and security as a category. So the app catalog is in the left column here. Over here, we can see all the various folders, and we can see the dashboards and queries that are available to you for various teams. You're free to share these out and collaborate across teams utilizing this folder system. And then if we go to compliance and security, we see quite a bit of content in here. Maybe we get a little bit more specific. You can see all of the PCI compliance out of the box content. So in this case, we see the PCI compliance content that's specific to AWS CloudTrail, VPC Flow, Linux, Palo Alto Networks, Windows. We'll touch on all this today. We'll get a lot more specific. We also have our more generalized, and we can see a couple previews here. We have a more generalized set of dashboards that essentially you would be working with our professional services team in this instance, or you can get off and running by kind of spooling up a couple of queries that are specific to your team. And there's some out of the box content that you can also see here as a part of that process. You can kind of navigate through and just make sure that there's alignment with, even just mixing and matching. If you have DynamoDB content that you want to use, but you want to get specific to compliance, for sure you could just essentially add the library, add the relevant source categories here, And then you'd be able to start generating more specific queries that align with your compliance requirements. Excellent. So let me just dive into the actual content now. So let's get off and running with PCI compliance. So let's start with kind of the posture overview. So in this view, we can see a breakdown basically of failures by requirements. And in this instance, we can see that requirement 6 is very much what is driving the lion's share, and as well as requirement 7, the lion's share of the number of counts. We see 40,000 plus counts, 43,000 plus counts of failures by requirements. And then just a little bit different view, we see a history of failures over the last 3 days. In this case, we see that, because of the stack bar charts and how they're designed, we can see that, for example, in this particular time slice, requirement 2 is responsible for kind of the lion's share of failures for an overarching look at the data sources that are coming into the system. And then we get that kind of high level total view of how many incidents there have been. So let's jump into requirement 1. So requirement 1 is all about installing, maintaining firewall configuration. So it gives us a closer look at denied traffic over time, silently drop traffic over time, allowed traffic over time. You can see kind of the alignment across all three, that there are these kind of spikes and drops that happen in conjunction with each other. And then it kind of gets more granular from there into top destination IP, top source IP. We can absolutely click into any of these that we might want to drill down into. And in this case, we can see that the source category is listed as it's wildcarded on Palo Alto Networks, all traffic, and then we're searching for drop or ICMP in order to identify the silently drop traffic that we want to actually navigate to. So yeah, we can actually see the more granular data. We see the aggregated data, which is what's visualized in the dashboard. You can always update the dashboard at any time. And then we see actual granular messages that we're going message by message here, and we can see the specific data that underpins that before it's being broken down by time slice and then counted out by time slice, which is these separations of time in order to indicate how we can actually just group each of these together and look for these larger trends. So that gives you a little bit of a sense of what a drill down looks like, and as well as just an overarching view of just what our dashboards are capable of, how they can be utilized. In this instance, we can see requirement 2 now is all about focus on not using vendor supplied defaults for passwords and other security parameters. So here we can see in this instance, we're looking at Linux data in particular, and we're saying, what are the number of failed versus successful logins? In of itself, we might be a little bit concerned to see that, the ratio is reasonably, we might expect a lower number of failed logins just by ratio alone as compared to successful logins. You certainly could drill down again from here. You can see the Labs OS Linux data is what's underpinning that. And you can actually get really granular from there if you want to start looking at the specific messages, start seeing what is actually popping up, building out queries in order to really fine tune your perception on, what might be causing those failed logins, in which instances are those actually root users, which might be of a larger concern as well, because that's when we can actually see some really valid security concerns as well. Jumping ahead to requirement 4. So this is focused on encryption of transmission of cardholder data. Of course, this would be really critical to PCI compliance requirements, given the cardholder data, how cardholder data is managed, how it's being secured, how privacy is being ensured as well is very critical to passing through those audit checks, et cetera. So as a result, you can really see that this will allow you to quickly visualize and generate reports where necessary in order to communicate out to the necessary teams what you're seeing, what might be of concern. Here we can see insecure allowed traffic by target port and involved host. So we can see the largest by far would be it's listed as destination port 80 protocol TCP, and then you can see the IP here. And this might be something we want to drill down into, especially with it being broken down by target port and involved host. It's a pretty good indicator of where the action is and what might need to be addressed. We can also see insecure allowed traffic by protocol, and then network activity is shown here by unencrypted default port as well. So let's jump ahead to requirement 5. So this is all about protecting systems against malware and updating anti-virus or anti-malware software as well. So this will actually be broken into 2 different dashboards. So let's start with the first, which is all about how much malware is being detected. In this case, we see 13 specific types of malware that are detected. And then it's broken down by severity level. So this can be helpful because we can say, okay, in this instance, we're actually seeing 95% is listed as high severity, something we very much may want to address. And then we can start building these kind of cross sections as well. So we see Google Drive and Box are kind of roughly half and half. So if we were to build out an additional panel here, we could say, what are the malware incidents by app broken down by severity? In which case we might say that, you know, Box is more likely to have a high severity than Google Drive, and just kind of perform that root cause analysis to really drive towards resolution there. Just kind of scrolling down, we can see other, you know, breakouts. So we see the malware types get much more specific here. We see custom hash hits, Trojan, malicious app, more or less all of reasonably high concern, but for your particular environment, it might be more of a concern to see a Trojan in one instance versus ransomware in a different. For a healthcare company, for sure, we're in recent years, we've seen many headlines come in about ransomware. So we know that this is of high concern and something to be addressed. So yeah, various other breakouts within that. And you, as with any dashboard, you are totally free to drill down into the log search. And you can also set filters on each of these in order to ensure that you're covering the right app category, the right app destination IP, and just getting more specific as you kind of perform that analysis. As I said, this is broken down into 2 different dashboards. So similarly to the previous dashboard, here we see the breakdown for antivirus specifically, and we can see that severity actually over time, or based on these time slices, we see outliers in events where we see either high or low counts. In this case, obviously high would be more of a concern than low. So these pink triangles actually indicate that it's crossed over a threshold into outliers. So it's telling us that this green pool, if you will, is the range that we would expect to see within a given time slice. The pink is actually a triangle that's broken out of that expected range. And so the outlier operator just gives you that functionality right out of the box. We also see this forecast capability. So this blue line here is indicating any time that we expect to see something drop off or go in a certain direction based on previous behavior, this is what the blue line is actually predicting based on that operator. Jumping ahead, so requirement 6 is all about developing, maintaining, and maintaining secure systems and applications. So in this instance, we're focused on Windows data in particular. We can see as this panel loads, we're seeing the Windows update trends over time. So it's actually reasonably flat, which was probably a good thing. We don't want to see any drastic spikes, certainly not as far as failures go, or even attempts. Attempts may make more sense because you may be keeping your updates on a specific cron job that keeps it on a cadence. Failures always would be more of a concern, but here we're kind of happy to see that it's relatively flat over time, probably less of a concern. But this is going to really help you to track to your policy requirements. If you've set policy requirements for various Windows updates that you expect to see coming into your system, then you know for sure that that everything is tracking the way that you expect it to, and that you don't need to make any updates to your general approach to how you actually tackle those Windows updates. Requirement 7 is all about restricting access to cardholder data by business need to know. So this is actually looking more closely at, in this case, the creation and deletion of various user accounts. So we see, in this case, the destination host, the destination user, and the process attached to it. And then getting more interesting into the actual visuals behind it, we can see that SSHD is really responsible for the most likely active services over time that are attached to utilization of that cardholder data. So we can assume in this case that service is actually most directly tied to handling that data. And that's kind of a leading indicator to us that that's the kind of the kind of service that we should be keeping a closer eye on. And then we see kind of a distant second looks like is DH client, and then it kind of drops off from there into various others. You're free to kind of scroll through the deeper list here, but certainly always seeing that one breakout of what's kind of the number one player can be really helpful as you kind of navigate through and think about which services attached to which aspects of cardholder data need to be tracked most closely, and how you may want to actually ensure that those systems are more secure in line with the rest of the dashboards we've looked at today. Okay, so requirement 8 is identifying and authenticating access to system components. So we're actually going to be looking at a more or less the same dashboard here. We're going to be looking at the user account creation, user account deletion. And the reason for that is, in this case, we're less focused on how those active services attach to various data types. We're more interested in saying what are the actual identification and authentication points of each of these users, and how are those user accounts being created? Is it in line with what we'd expect? You could certainly make the argument for an additional panel right below this, for example, that would actually show a breakout of, the visualization of the destination host or even process breaking out of like how many more user accounts are being created attached to a given process, in which case we can really help to better understand how those access points actually tie back to the system components and start connecting the dots, having a better visualization on kind of those access points, and really making sure that you have good visibility into requirement 8 in particular. Okay, so requirement 9 is, on one hand, we'll look at how we restrict physical access to cardholder data. This could be an instance where you're using a service like secure with a Q, that is, and you might say, okay, so based on the way that this cardholder is actually accessing a given point, or even just a credit card holder in that point, we can see in this way, regardless of what data source you're looking at, we can actually see the visualization is what we want to really focus on here, is the kind of geo mapping that's available to you within the platform. So I'm actually going full screen here, and what you can see here is, a basically hotspot on the East Coast, right? So we have identified that somewhere on the East Coast there's a little bit higher spiking of data that we may not expect otherwise, and we can kind of zoom in on that, and we can see that it looks like New York City has quite a big kind of spike. But then, as expected, we also see quite a large amount of data in Alexandria and various parts of kind of Northwest Virginia, which would seem to indicate probably that it's connected to some sort of AWS instances as well. So then if we just zoom back out, we can look at the larger view and say, okay, so it looks like California as well is showing spikes, Washington as well. So it's just kind of a helpful way to get a quick visual. And then we might also look at the opposite and say, in this instance, it might be valuable to even swap the colors, right? And say, what if larger numbers are green, smaller numbers are red, in which case we might be a little bit alarmed to see, for example, if we weren't expecting to do business in the Philippines, but we see 153 hits, then that may be something to address as we think about that physical access to cardholder data. And then we also see that actual breakout of visits by country over time. Here we actually see United States is responsible for the lion's share, but it's also broken down by the various other countries, China being kind of the second closest. And just a little bit different visual way of looking at this, and then getting a quicker sense of what those regional breakouts are. So jumping ahead, so requirement 10 is tracking and monitoring all access to network resources and cardholder data. So in this case, we're actually looking at API calls specifically, and we're looking at console root login failures as well. So this will tell us, as a really good kind of leading indicator, what are the console root login failures? Where are there these unexpected kind of events where we may not anticipate console root login failures to happen quite at this quantity, in which case we can start to look more closely at what are the actual users attached to it? What event type is occurring? If we're happy with AWS console sign-in as being the attempted kind of login that was not successful, then we can kind of move on. But if there's one that is a more concern, then we may need to actually address that. And then of course you have your login successes here as well. I do want to spend with the last couple minutes. We should spend some time quickly on requirement 11, right? So this one's a little bit unique in that, we're talking here about regularly testing security systems and processes. And requirement 11 has two unique things about it. So firstly, it's using actually what we call our new dashboards. So the advantage of new dashboards is you can integrate both logs and metrics into them. The second thing that you can see just by the image type here is that Aqua Security is being utilized here. So it's a little bit of a dependency that you would be using that service, but it's actually giving you more granular data about the containers themselves. And so in this case, we can see these non-compliant versus images failed by malware, images failed by severe CVE. And that's really going to give you the ability to test all of your systems processes to make sure they align with those PCI compliance policies that you've set up, and make sure that these failures by CVE or non-compliant images list are not kind of throwing any red flags that need to be addressed, in which case you can work to get them compliant with your existing policies. And with the last minute or two, we'll touch briefly on requirement 12, which is all about maintaining a policy that addresses your general information security principles and requirements. So in this case, we can see specific to S3, and interestingly, this actually touched on one of the questions that came up in kind of the pre-Q&A, was around how do we track S3 data in order to actually improve your security or your PCI compliance posture. Here you can see audit policy changes in particular, and I'm happy to share this query with anyone that has a more specific interest in it. It's also just available straight out of the app catalog if you want to grab it from there. And we can see the account policy changes that come with that, the alerts for S3 bucket policy changes, and then we can see these spikes that have occurred for specifically 4704, 4705 event IDs, which can be really interesting for kind of digging more deeply into that. So with that, I'm just going to check quickly on the Q&A. And if anyone does have any questions, then absolutely feel free. I'm just going to stop sharing for a moment here. So looks like we had a question, which is, we have a guest who's wondering, they're wondering how to translate these dashboards panels into actionable alerts. I'm really glad you mentioned that, because that's one piece that I haven't touched on yet. He says, also these dashboards seem like straightforward information with only some PCI requirements here and there. For example, requirement 7 is how to translate business need to know to Sumo world. So let me touch on the alerts in a moment. To the question of these broader kind of data sources being used for business need to know, as you mentioned, that just sort of aligns with requirement 7, but we can absolutely tune these dashboards to be more specific to whatever data sources you have coming into the system. So if you have a really specific data source that you're excited about, or even just way of tuning that panel, you can absolutely work with our customer success team or professional services team, or just get off and running on your own and really make that all happen. That's sort of one way to approach it. And then lastly, the question was data sources behind the dashboards are pretty diverse, which is totally true. Each dashboard is using one or a handful of data sources. If you have many applications in the PCI scope, what is the best way to leverage Sumo to help us meet PCI DSS? That's an amazing question. I'm really glad that you asked it. The answer to that question is that you can absolutely search across, you could search across all of your data just by doing a wildcard, so just with an asterisk. You can also get more specific and just combine data sources. So if you wanted to do Linux and Windows data, you could do a wildcard Linux and wildcard Windows, and you could combine the two into one sort of joint query. So you're totally flexible, and you're totally right. We looked at a lot of diverse data sets today, and there are a lot of different ways that you can actually run through all of them. Let me actually just run through before, let me reshare screen. I want to show you guys alerts because I'm really glad that someone brought that up, and that, I want to make sure that we actually address that question. So one moment here. So as you can see here, if you just we're just looking at the audit, the S3 bucket specifically. And if you just go to save as, you can go to schedule this search. So a scheduled search is our internal nomenclature for creating an alert. And then you can do real time or every 15 minutes or whatever makes the most sense. Every time there's a result, let's say greater than 3, you can fire off either an email, script action, ServiceNow connection, etc. Save to index, which would be just a scheduled search, and then a webhook for PagerDuty or Slack. And then you can also set the recipients in email here. In this case, we're setting it to real time, and you can set the various time zones and the logic behind that alert. So hopefully that's helpful. If I just hit save on that, that will actually create an alert as long as I have added a recipient. Cool. So I'm going to stop sharing there. I think I covered all of Lu Xiao's questions. I hope I pronounced your name correctly. The next question is, the PCI compliance app in Sumo is a paid app, is the question from Don Stewart. So Don, thanks for answering that or asking that question. If you're working with a professional services team in order to get up and running and do something a little bit more custom to your environment, then absolutely it would in that case be a paid engagement with professional services. But everything that I've showed today, with I think only one exception of one dashboard, so 11 of the 12 dashboards come straight out of the app catalog. So that actually would just be available to everyone on day one, as long as you're bringing in that data source, whether it's Linux data, whether it's Windows data or Okta data, for a random example here. You would be able to actually get off and running just on day one without any payment. It is part of the paid Sumo offering, but in the free trial as well, you'd be able to use that as well. But no need to pay for these individually. And then the second piece would be, are these dashboards, so David Day was asking, are these dashboards part of the pre-built app? So we just spoke to that. Yes, 11 of the 12 come from the pre-built app catalog. And David mentioned that he's downloaded the CloudTrail and Windows, but don't see all of these. So feel free to reach out to me, David, individually. I'll definitely track down your contact details if you don't have mine, and we can find a way to get that sorted. I'll actually chat you my email address, and we can get you sorted out. All of these are available. They might be under slightly different names than what you're seeing in the demo today. But for sure, CloudTrail and Windows are something that we can get you off and running with. And then the second question from David was, if not, can a JSON be provided? So yeah, I think we answered that it's definitely in the app catalog, but for sure the JSON would be easily shareable if needed as well. So all good there. Let me just share screen so that people have a link, as I see that it's in the chat window now as well. But I'm just going to share screen and give people a sense of the how to get started on the free trial. So thanks to everyone that was able to join today, and feel free to get up and running with the free trial if you're not already signed up at sumologic.com/sign-up. And thanks so much to everyone that was able to join today. The link is there just in the window, and I'll go ahead and send my email over to David as well so that he has that. Have a great rest of the day.